Hey guys, in today's video, I bring you an impressive and transformative story. Let's meet Theron Aldridge, a pastor who died for 15 minutes while preaching and came back with a totally different view on God, life, and our connection to the universe. What he experienced on the other side is something that will challenge everything you believe and reveal a truth that religions have never told. So, before we start, leave your like, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any incredible stories like this, and activate the bell to receive all notifications. Now, get ready for this heartwarming story that will change your perspective forever. My name is Theron Aldridge. Today, I am a pastor in Charleston, South Carolina, where I dedicate my life to guiding people on their spiritual journeys. But what I want to share with you now is a very personal story, one that changed my view of God, the purpose of life, and even death. When I was 17, my life took an unexpected turn. A terrifying diagnosis made me confront mortality in a way I never would have imagined for someone so young. I discovered I had a rare and dangerous tumor called paraganglioma, which threatened to take away everything I knew and loved. In the years that followed, I was forced to confront not just physical pain, but also the most profound questions anyone can ask. Why? Why me? Why would God allow this? My search for answers took me to places I never planned to visit. I began studying philosophy and theology, trying to understand the meaning of human suffering. It was a spiritual journey that seemed, at times, to bring more questions than answers. Eventually, this quest led me to seminary, where I began training to become a pastor. I thought that maybe by dedicating my life to serving God, I could find a greater purpose for what I was going through. But the biggest revelation of my life didn't come in books or classes. It happened in a moment of complete vulnerability, in the middle of a sermon, while I was preaching in a hospital chapel. It was there that my heart stopped, and I left this world for 15 minutes. I want you to understand something from the beginning. What I am about to relate is not easy to describe, not because it's painful, but because it was more real than anything I've ever experienced. I went to a place that transcends human words. I found a presence so loving and wise that it changed my life forever. I saw what it means to be connected to something much bigger than ourselves. Today, I am here because this presence decided that my journey was not over yet. Reluctantly, I was brought back to fulfill a mission I'm still trying to fully understand. And that's what I want to share with you, how my experience changed me and what it taught me about what it really means to live. At 17, my life felt like it was just beginning. I was a normal boy, with dreams, friends, and an optimistic vision of the future. But everything changed on a day that started like any other. During a class at school, I felt my heart racing uncontrollably. My vision went dark, and I woke up on the floor with my teacher's worried gaze staring at me. I thought it was a simple faint, perhaps caused by the heat or the stress of studying. But that episode was just the beginning. The fainting spells became more frequent, always accompanied by an overwhelming feeling that my body was losing control. My hands were shaking. My heart felt like it was going to explode, and I was covered in cold sweat. At first, doctors thought I was suffering from anxiety attacks. It's normal for teenagers to face these kinds of things, they said. But I knew there was something more. I felt, deep down, that something very wrong was happening. After months of exams and visits to specialists, a cardiologist decided to deepen the investigation. Then an MRI revealed the truth. I had a tumor called a paraganglioma, located near my adrenal gland. It was so rare that the doctor had to explain it to me carefully, using simple words. This tumor, he said, can release dangerous chemicals into your body. It works like a time bomb, Theron. Any stress, any strong emotion, can trigger an explosion that could be fatal. Those words resonated with me like a sentence. I was just 17 and already facing mortality head-on. It was as if the ground had been ripped out from under my feet. I tried to remain calm as the doctor continued talking, but all I could think was, why me? Why would God allow something like this to happen to me? My mother, Amelia, was at my side, holding my hand tightly. She was always a practical woman, but at that moment I saw tears streaming down her face. "We'll get through this, son," she said in a firm voice, but there was something in her eyes that she couldn't hide, fear. That night, I couldn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling, trying to make sense of it all. I began to reflect on things that had never crossed my mind before. What was the purpose of life? Why do some people face such deep pain while others seem to live peacefully? It was as if my diagnosis had lit a fire inside me, an urgent need to understand the why of everything. It was at this point that my spiritual journey began. I decided I wasn't going to passively accept what was happening to me. If God wanted me to face this, I needed to find out why. The years following the diagnosis were a roller coaster of emotions, treatments, and constant hospital visits. The first tumor was successfully removed, but doctors warned me that it could come back. And it did, more aggressive each time. With each new battle, I clung tighter to my faith and my seminary studies. I had just been accepted for an internship at the local hospital I chose, where I helped provide words of comfort to patients and their families. I believed I was finally finding purpose amidst the chaos of my condition. However, my body started showing signs that something was wrong again. It wasn't just the exhaustion of dealing with the seminar and internship. It was different. The dizziness was returning, followed by episodes of tachycardia so intense that I felt my heart trying to escape from my chest. It was as if a silent shadow was always lurking, ready to swallow me. I remember one particular morning when I got up to prepare my sermon for the hospital chapel. When I opened my Bible, I felt so dizzy that I held onto the table to keep from falling. My heart felt like a beatless drum. "Not today," I muttered to myself, trying to shake off the fear. He had a commitment to fulfill and patients who needed to hear words of hope. Despite the signs, I decided to move forward. In the chapel, while speaking to a small congregation of hospital patients and staff, I chose Psalm 23 as my base text. "Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me." Ironic, looking back, my voice started to shake and I felt a weight in my chest. It was unlike anything I had ever felt before, as if an invisible force was squeezing my heart. "God is our strength." Those were the last words I managed to say before everything went dark. I woke up in a place that wasn't the chapel. It wasn't a hospital. It wasn't this world. My physical journey had stopped there, but my spiritual journey was just beginning. When my eyes opened, I was no longer in the chapel. I felt no pain. There was no sound of hospital machines or distressed voices around me. All I saw was a green expanse, a hill covered in grass so perfect it seemed to have been sculpted by divine hands. Every blade of grass felt alive, gently pulsing as if it had its own rhythm, a beat that echoed inside me. The sky was such a deep blue that it seemed to stretch endlessly. There was no sun, but a golden light permeated the air, filling every corner with a sense of warmth and love. I walked without knowing where I was going. Or perhaps it would be more accurate to say that I didn't need to know. Each step seemed to be guided by an invisible force, a pull that carried me to the top of the hill. When I got there, I noticed that in the center of the hill there was a tree. It was the most majestic tree I had ever seen, tall with branches that stretched out as if to embrace the sky. Its leaves glowed in shades of gold and silver, and I could hear a soft sound, as if the leaves were singing a melody that I couldn't understand, but that soothed my soul. As I admired the landscape, a presence made itself felt. It wasn't something I saw immediately, but I felt it before I realized it. It was as if the air around me took shape, an energy so intense it brought me to my knees, not out of fear, but out of reverence. Slowly, a light began to form before me, so bright that it seemed to contain all the colors that exist and, at the same time, none. This light had no face or defined shape, but I knew it was a conscious entity. I knew she knew me. Theron. My name was not spoken aloud, but it resonated within me, as if the light itself was speaking directly to my soul. "You got here because you needed answers." Who are you?" I asked, although deep down I already knew the answer. "I am part of everything you know. I am in all things, just as you are connected to all of them. I am here to help you understand." I felt tears streaming down my face, not out of sadness, but because, for the first time, I felt completely understood, completely accepted. "I don't want to go back," I confessed. Here I feel peace. Here I feel like I'm finally home." The entity seemed to smile, although I couldn't see a face. "I know, Theron, but your journey is not over yet. There is more you need to do. Your life is still necessary." I tried to argue, but before I could say more, I felt an indescribable warmth, as if the light had placed a hand on my shoulder. "I will be with you every step of the way, Theron. You will never be alone." And then, against my will, I felt the light begin to fade, and the world around me began to dissolve. Waking up was like being pulled from a dream into a painful reality. The warmth and peace of the hill were gone, replaced by the cold of the hard floor of the hospital chapel. My body felt heavy, as if carrying the weight of two worlds. My ears were flooded with high-pitched voices and sounds, beeping machines, hurried footsteps, and a voice that sounded familiar, full of desperation. It was Amelia, my wife. "He's coming back. Theron, please stay with us." I heard his trembling voice before I could even open my eyes. My breathing was ragged, each breath a monumental effort, as if my lungs had forgotten how to work. I'm here," I managed to mutter, my voice barely audible. My eyelids finally opened, and I saw Amelia's face, wet with tears, holding my hand so tightly that she seemed afraid of losing me again. You were dead, Theron," she said, between sobs. 15 minutes without a pulse. 15 minutes. The doctors around me looked incredulous. One of them, Dr. Harrison, approached, still holding the defibrillator in his hands. "Pastor Aldridge," he began, with a mixture of relief and astonishment. "We were ready to declare him dead. You came back when there was no hope." I wanted to respond, but the words seemed to escape. All I could do was look around, trying to process what had happened. I remembered the hill, the light, the voice that spoke directly to my soul. It was so vivid, so real, that this world now seemed strange, smaller, somehow. "Theron," Amelia continued, stroking my face with trembling fingers. "I thought I had lost you, but something told me not to give up. I kept praying. I kept saying God had a purpose for you." These words hit me deeply. I knew she was right. The entity on the hill had told me the same, but accepting this truth was more difficult than I imagined. All I wanted was to go back to that place, down to that absolute peace, but I was here. Why? For what? I was taken to the hospital for further tests. Doctors and nurses walked past my bed, shaking their heads in disbelief. My heart was functioning normally, and all the tests seemed to indicate that I was fine. "It's like nothing happened," said Dr. Harrison, still analyzing my results. "But, Theron, this is a miracle. There is no other explanation." That night, as I stood alone in the hospital room with the dim light of a lamp beside me, I closed my eyes and murmured, "I understand. I accept. Show me what I must do." And for the first time since I returned, I felt the warmth of that light again. It wasn't as intense as it was on the hill, but it was there, a comforting presence, as if saying, "You are not alone." After I was released from the hospital, life seemed to return to normal, at least in appearance. I continued preaching, fulfilling my seminary responsibilities, and trying to adjust to the routine. However, something inside me had changed irrevocably. The experience on the hill and the encounter with the entity had transformed my view of God, faith, and even existence itself. But how to share this with others, especially in an environment where traditional doctrines were fervently followed? My first attempt to explain what had happened was during a seminary class. We were discussing the omnipresence of God, and I decided to relate a part of my experience without many details. "God is not just a being who reigns over us," he said, choosing his words carefully. "He is the foundation of everything. He is in every blade of grass, in every breath, in every connection we have with each other." The room fell silent, and for a brief moment, I thought maybe they understood. But then Pastor Lionel Carrington, my seminary mentor, raised his hand. "Theron, that sounds nice, but it's starting to stray from Scripture," he said, his tone firm but polite. "We cannot dilute God into a concept. He is a person, a supreme being, not an impersonal force." I felt my face flush. I didn't want to contradict Lionel, a man I deeply respected. "I'm not saying God isn't a being," I replied calmly. "What I mean is that he is more than that. He is everything. He is the fabric of existence. There is no separation between us and him." Lionel shook his head, his expression one of concern. "Theron, you have been through something extraordinary, but be careful not to stray from the truth that God has revealed in Scripture." This conversation was just the first of many that tested my faith and patience. Some seminar colleagues began to look at me skeptically, as if I were losing my way. Others avoided the topic altogether, as if they feared that discussing my experience would be dangerous. Even at home, challenges arose. Amelia, my wife, has always been my biggest support. But even she struggled to understand what I was trying to share. "Theron," she said one night as we sat in the living room, "I believe you saw something wonderful. But why do you think God would show you something so different from what everyone believes?" I took his hand and looked into his eyes. "Because perhaps it's time for us to understand God in a deeper way," I replied, "not to reject what we believe, but to expand on it. God is not smaller than we imagine. He is greater." These words seemed to comfort her a little, but the discomfort still lingered between us. I was beginning to realize that my mission would not be easy. Sharing my experience meant challenging beliefs and facing doubts, not just from others, but also my own. It was a constant internal conflict between what I had experienced and what was accepted as truth in my circle. But I knew, with the same certainty I had felt on the hill, that I needed to move forward, even if the path was lonely. After weeks of facing skeptical looks and uncomfortable questions, something inside me began to shift. I realized that the experience I had was not a burden, but a gift. It didn't matter if others believed or understood. What mattered was that I knew. I knew there was something much bigger that connected us, something that called to us constantly, even when we were distracted or lost. The transformation was not sudden. It came little by little, like the light of dawn that invades a dark room. I began to see things differently. The people rushing by on the streets, the patients I visited in the hospital, even the sermons I preached. Everything seemed interconnected, as if every moment and every person were part of a great, divine puzzle. One of the first opportunities to put this new vision into practice came when I visited a patient named Margaret. She was an elderly woman with terminal cancer. When I entered his room, his expression was tired, and his eyes reflected a mixture of pain and resignation. I sat next to her and started talking. "I'm Pastor Aldridge," she said, her voice weak. "I've prayed so hard to be healed, but I don't think God is listening to me. Maybe I'm not worthy of his attention." I held his hand gently. "Margaret, God is not somewhere far away, looking at you from afar," I replied. "He is here in this moment with you. He is in your tears, in the air you breathe, in the love you feel for the people you love. He is not something separate from you. He is in you." She started to cry, but it didn't seem like it was from sadness. It was as if a weight was being lifted from his shoulders. "I never thought of it like that," she said. "It gives me peace." That conversation was a milestone for me. I realized that my mission was not just to preach, but to help people see God in a way that connects them to his presence in their own lives. My experience on the hill wasn't just for me. It was something to be shared, to show that divine love was much greater than we could imagine. I began adapting my sermons, using stories and metaphors to convey this new perspective. Not all listeners accepted, but those who did demonstrated something that gave me hope. They felt touched. Some cried, others were grateful, and some came to me with new questions about faith and life. It was as if a new light was being turned on in the darkness. My transformation was not just spiritual, it was practical. I realized that living my mission meant taking action, not just talking. I began working more closely with terminally ill patients and their families, helping them find peace and meaning in their final moments. My wife, Queen Amelia, eventually began to realize the depth of impact this new vision had, both on me and those around me. The mission that the entity had mentioned was not something grand and abstract. It was something simple but deeply important, helping others reconnect with God and the unity of everything that surrounds us. And in return, my own connection to God and others grew stronger every day. My spiritual transformation was profound, but it also brought unexpected challenges to my relationships. Amelia, my wife, has always been my pillar, but even she had difficulty fully understanding the change that occurred in me after my near-death experience. I could feel his concern and hesitation when he talked about the hill, the entity, and the divine connection that I now saw in all things. One night, while we were having dinner, she finally decided to broach the subject. "Theron," she began, placing her fork on her plate. "I know you went through something that changed your life, but sometimes I feel like you came back different, like you were someone else." I looked at her, feeling the weight of her words. She wasn't wrong. I had changed. "I understand what you're saying," I replied, trying to find the right words. "But what happened to me didn't make me a different person. It just showed me who I really am and who we all are, connected, part of something bigger." Amelia leaned forward, her hands clasped together. "But, Theron, what you describe, isn't what we learn in church. It's not what you've always believed. How am I supposed to understand that? I took his hand, looking into his eyes. Amelia, what I saw does not contradict what we have learned. It expands. God is not smaller than we imagine. He is much greater. And all I feel now is that my mission is to share this understanding, even if it is difficult to explain. She was silent for a moment, processing my words. Finally, he sighed. I don't know if I can fully understand, but I see how it's changed you, and I see the good you're doing for others. Maybe I don't need to understand everything. Maybe I just need to trust you. Those words were like a balm for my soul. I knew Amelia still had doubts, but her support, however tentative, meant the world to me. Reconciliations also needed to be made in the seminary. Lionel Carrington, my mentor, still looked at me skeptically. He called me into his office for a private conversation. Theron, he said, looking over his glasses as I sat down, I have been observing your preaching, and I confess that I am concerned. You seem to be moving away from what we teach here. I took a deep breath, feeling the tension in the air. Pastor Carrington, I am not walking away. What I have experienced has brought me closer to God than I have ever been, but I understand that my experience may be difficult to accept. He crossed his arms, thoughtful. What you describe is beautiful, but also dangerous. Many may get lost trying to interpret God as something other than what he has revealed in Scripture. I agree, I replied, looking directly into his eyes. But what if this experience was an invitation from God to understand him in a more complete way? What if he is calling us to expand our vision, to realize that he is in everything, always with us? Lionel was silent for a long moment before finally saying, I still have doubts, Theron, but if this is truly from God, the truth will come out. These conversations marked a turning point for me. I realized that reconciliation didn't mean making everyone understand or agree with me. It meant accepting that everyone has their own journey, just as I had mine. Even with the challenges, my path was clear. I needed to keep sharing what I had experienced, regardless of the doubts or criticisms. As the months passed, I began to better understand the mission that the entity had mentioned. She hadn't asked me to change the world in a big way or perform miraculous feats. My mission was much more intimate and personal, to help people reconnect with God and, at the same time, with themselves and others. This understanding began to manifest itself in my work at the hospital. One day, I received a call from a nurse asking me to visit a patient named Michael, a 23-year-old young man diagnosed with terminal leukemia. When I entered the room, he was lying on the bed, with a distant look, staring at the ceiling. As he introduced me, he turned his head slowly with a bitter smile. So, you're the pastor? He asked. Are you here to tell me that God has a plan for me? There was a mixture of anger and pain in his voice, something I recognized on a deep level. I sat next to his bed and said calmly, Actually, I'm here to listen. If you want, I can share what I believe, but only if that's something you want. Michael seemed surprised by my answer. He looked at me more closely, as if trying to understand my intention. I've heard every religious cliché possible, he said, sighing. What can you tell me that's different? I paused for a moment before responding. Michael, I'm not going to pretend that I completely understand what you're going through, but I know what it's like to feel like life is spinning out of your control. I know what it's like to question the purpose of everything. And what I've learned is that God isn't there, somewhere far away, writing plans we can't understand. He is here, in this moment, with you. He feels your pain, your anger, and he doesn't judge you for it. Michael was silent, but I noticed his hands relax. It was as if he was starting to let go of the weight he was carrying. And you really believe that? He asked, his tone softer. I don't just believe it, I replied, looking straight into his eyes. I know this because I was once in a place where the connection with God was so real that everything made sense. It's not a blind belief. It's a certainty that changed the way I see the world. As the weeks passed, I continued to visit Michael. Our conversations became moments of reflection for both of us. He began to find a measure of peace, accepting that even in the uncertainty of life, there was something greater holding it all together. In addition to the hospital, I began organizing small discussion groups at my church. Instead of preaching traditional sermons, he encouraged honest conversations about doubts, fears, and spiritual experiences. People were beginning to share stories of loss, hope, and faith in ways they had never done before. It was as if my testimony opened doors for others to explore their own journeys. My wife, Amelia, watched these changes with a mixture of pride and admiration. She joined me at some of these meetings, helping to create a welcoming space for those who came looking for something more. One night, as we were setting up chairs after a date, she came up to me and said, "You know, Theron, I think I'm starting to understand now. You're not trying to change God for people. You're helping people realize that God has always been with them." Those words moved me deeply. That was it. That was the mission I had brought from that hill, to show people that God was not far away but as close as their own breath. Every conversation, every moment of connection, reinforced my certainty that I was on the right path, and by helping others, I also felt more connected to God and the light that had transformed me. My near-death experience was the most transformative moment of my life. For a long time, I tried to find words to describe it, but I realized that what happened on that hill was not something that could be completely captured in sentences or explanations. It was a lived experience, felt at the core of my being, something that could only be understood by those who have also felt connected to the divine in a way that transcends human understanding. Today, when I look back, I clearly see that that meeting was an invitation, not an invitation to change the world on a grand scale, but to live so that my life was a reflection of the love, connection, and unity I felt in that place. I don't need to convince anyone of anything. My mission is simply to be a channel for people to find God in their own journeys. My faith has been transformed, not in the sense that I have abandoned the beliefs I learned, but in the sense that those beliefs now have a deeper meaning. God is no longer a distant figure to me, sitting on a heavenly throne and watching from afar. It is the very fabric of existence, the bond that connects everything and everyone. He is the soft voice in the silence, the warmth of the sun on a cold day, the love we feel for each other. Today, as I preach in my church, I see faces that come from different journeys, each carrying their own pains, doubts, and hopes. When I speak, I try not to convey just words, but the same light that I experienced on that hill. You are not alone, I often say. God is not just something to be found. He is already here, present in everything you are and do. I was recently approached by a young man after a service. He had tears in his eyes when he said, "Pastor Theron, I always thought God was judging me, waiting for me to fail. But today, for the first time, I feel like He loves me as I am." Those words were a powerful reminder of why I am here, why I came back from that perfect, peaceful place. My mission was never about me. It was always about the next person. The entity I met on the hill promised me that I would not be alone, and that promise has been fulfilled every day since. I feel His presence in every conversation, in every moment of connection, in every small victory of faith. My journey is not over yet. I still have a lot to learn, experience, and share. But one thing is certain. What I saw, what I felt, showed me that there is no separation between us and God. We are all intertwined in a love that is infinite, unconditional, and eternal. And that, more than anything else, is what I want to leave as my legacy. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I often quote from Psalm 23, "I will fear no evil, for you are with me." Now I understand these words in a way I never did before. God is with us, not as a distant observer, but as the very essence of who we are. And it is this truth that I carry with me every day as I continue to walk this journey called life. If you like this beautiful spiritual testimony, leave a like, comment on your impressions, subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to activate the notification bell to watch each new video and help us spread this message to a greater number of people. Until next time.